Hey friends, great to have you back on the channel. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and make sure to turn on the bell notifications. Today we're going to break down the situation on several key sections of the front. The main focus is on the northern group of forces, which right now is setting the pace for the entire war and delivering results that no other direction can match. We'll also get to the south, Zaparijia, Costantinovka, Kupansk. There's plenty to unpack there too. But before we get into the frontline news, a few words on geopolitics. Because things there are also very interesting right now. Trump and Netanyahu, a serious falling out. According to available reports, Trump and Netanyahu had a genuinely difficult phone call, after which both came away, to put it mildly, unhappy. Trump is once again pushing for a deal with Iran. And this is perfectly understandable. Whatever noise he makes in public, the American president clearly understands that Iran's nuclear problem cannot be solved by military means. Airstrikes alone don't fundamentally change anything. Iran recovers, regroups, and keeps moving. A ground operation, on the other hand, would be a catastrophe. America's Vietnam in the Middle East, only under the conditions of modern armed conflict. That's why Trump is insisting on the negotiating track. Netanyahu categorically disagrees. For him, any agreement with Tehran looks like a strategic defeat, and so they quarreled. Meanwhile, while Washington figures out what to do about Iran, Trump has already found himself a new target, Cuba. According to incoming reports, American security structures are considering forceful options against Havana, including, by some accounts, scenarios involving Raúl Castro. Cuba is not Iran. It has no nuclear program, no deeply layered air defense system, no ability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. It is incomparably more vulnerable. The logic here is straightforward. What's needed is a quick, tangible win, a small and victorious war, to shift the narrative and hand Trump a political card on the domestic stage, following the obvious failure of his Iran strategy. Unfortunately, Cuba is about to face enormous pressure, and that is not good news for the island. Now to the front. And we'll start with the most interesting part. Kharkiv region, Northern Group enters Granov and destroys an AFU company near Izbitske. April and May have unequivocally been the Northern Group's months. When you look at the pace of advance, the volume of significant news, and the quality of positions taken, this is currently the most productive section across the entire front. I don't want to diminish the work of other groups, but the numbers speak for themselves. The most movement, the most important developments, all of it is coming from here. And in the past 24 hours, two serious pieces of news have come in at once. First, troops of the Northern Group have entered the border village of Granov in the Kharkiv region. Street fighting is now underway in the residential area. Russian assault groups are systematically clearing block by block. Granov itself is a small settlement, and holding it is objectively difficult for the AFU. Positions are under fire, there is no real defensive depth, and bringing up reinforcements under constant drone pressure is extremely challenging. In all likelihood, the Russian army will complete the clearance of Granov by the end of this week. And logically, the next move leads to Shevchenko. The two villages sit right next to each other, and from a defensive standpoint, they essentially form a single node. Having taken Granov, abandoning Shevchenko makes no sense, but the significance isn't Granov itself. It's what opens up afterwards. Once Granov and Shevchenko are taken, Russian assault groups will move directly onto the near approaches to Kozacha-Lopan, and that is where the picture changes entirely. Kozacha-Lopan is a completely different scale, a substantial settlement with dense residential construction, prepared defensive positions, and real depth. There will be no easy ride there. The AFU will not want to give it up, and that is understandable. Fighting for Kozacha-Lopan will likely stretch over several months, possibly the entire summer. Additional pressure should be expected from the eastern direction, from the Zhuravlivka area, to threaten the settlement's eastern outskirts and prevent the AFU from calmly building up their defenses. I won't rush to make predictions. I'll simply note that this is not Veterinan and it's not Granov. This is a large, seriously fortified point of resistance. The second piece of news from the Kharkiv region is significant. An entire AFU company was completely wiped out in the area of Izbitske. We're talking about the 5th Company of the 127th AFU Brigade, The full complement, every assault soldier killed in the forested terrain east of the settlement. The Ukrainian command had sent them there specifically to slow the Russian advance and create a buffer zone in the woods. The result, the company ceased to exist as a combat unit. In parallel, Russian units have already entered Izbitsky itself, where fighting is also ongoing. The destruction of an entire company tactical group at full strength on a single sector is not just a statistic. It is a tangible loss of manpower and, just as importantly, a serious blow to morale on that specific stretch of front. Sumy region, the Krasnopilia bridgehead, assault on Ryazan and the push toward the highway. The Krasnopilia bridgehead had an informationally quiet May. After the capture of Novodmitrivka and Taratutin, almost no news was coming from there. But that didn't mean there was no movement, there simply was no information coverage. Now the silence has been broken. Russian units have entered Ryazan and begun its assault. Ryazan is a noticeably more serious settlement than Taratutin. Larger in area, denser in construction, and correspondingly greater in defensive potential. It won't be taken easily, but seizing Ryazan opens the next move, an advance on Lizna and Maiska, and from there pressure directly on the Bohodukiv-Krasnopilia highway. Once Russian forces firmly cut this highway, the assault on Krasnopilia itself will begin. Possibly right after reaching the road, possibly in parallel with it. Notably, the highway is already effectively within range of FPV drones. Technically, movement along it is still possible. Some convoys get through if they're willing to take the risk. But the AFU can no longer use this road normally, systematically. Every convoy is a lottery. Sumy region, Zaparijia, Velika Rybetsia, and the road to Sumy. The Myropilia area deserves a separate discussion, and the situation there right now is very telling. Fighting for Zaparijia continues. Simultaneously, Russian drone operators have begun systematically burning out AAFU positions in the neighboring village of Velika Rybetsia, clear preparation for a subsequent assault on the settlement. Footage has already emerged showing a Russian FPV drone striking a wooden house in Velika Rybetsia with 3 Ukrainian servicemen inside. Now for why these two villages matter critically, not just tactically, but operationally and strategically. Zaparijia and Velika Rybetsia are the last settlements with any real defensive potential before the Sumy urban agglomeration. What follows is essentially nothing. Hrunivka, a few dozen houses, nothing to defend. Barilivka, roughly the same, 3 or 4 streets. Olshanka, even less. Only after all of that comes Velika Chernitshina, already effectively a suburb of Sumy. In other words, if the AFU lose Zaparijia and Velika Rybetsia, there is simply nowhere left for them to build the next proper defensive line, except within the city of Sumy itself. That is precisely why Ukrainian command will, without question, throw everything available at holding these villages. There is no other rational option. But the mere fact that fighting is already underway for Zaparijia, while Velika Rybetsia is already being systematically worked over by drones, that is already a very serious signal. One more thing worth adding. For genuinely stable control over this area, Russian units will need to clear not just the villages themselves, but the adjacent forest tracts, the woodland areas to the north and south. Without that, the flanks will remain exposed. There is a lot of work still ahead. But the prospects taking shape on this section of the front are genuinely serious. The northern group is methodically, step by step, building the foundation for a future offensive on Sumy. If the war carries over from 2026 into 2027, and there is currently no reason to think otherwise, then a full-scale assault on Sumy from multiple directions, from the north and from the east, is something I assess as a highly probable scenario. In parallel, on the Sumy direction proper, from the Vorozhba and Korchakivka area, Russian forces continue pressing toward Novosich. Additionally, an expansion of the controlled zone around Kondratovka and Andriivka has been confirmed by video. Russian units have advanced more than a kilometer north of Kondratovka. Movement is happening across multiple points simultaneously, a sign of coordinated pressure rather than isolated probes. Kupansk direction strikes in Novusinov and Kovsharivka. On the Kupansk section, 2 video confirmations were received in the past 24 hours, both from Russian sources. Russian units are engaging AFU positions in the private residential sector of Novosinov and in the multi-story construction of Kovsharivka. Artillery and FPV drones both active. Activity is being recorded across the entire line of contact here. The footage allows for a refinement of the front line. Forward positions of Russian units have been confirmed at several points. Separately, the elimination of 2 Ukrainian servicemen by an FPV drone has been recorded at one location in the area. No significant territorial changes were reflected on the map at the time of this report, but combat pressure on the sector persists, and judging by the pattern of activity is building. Sloviansk direction. Fighting near Oleksandrivka. On the Sloviansk direction, there are no territorial changes on the map for now, but the situation is live. Active fighting is underway in the area of Oleksandrivka. The AFU have deployed a significant number of FPV crews here, trying to hold their positions and prevent Russian groups from consolidating. According to a number of pro-Russian sources, Russian units have already entered the eastern part of Oleksandrivka and carried out a rotation of forces. However, this information currently lacks video confirmation. Waiting for materials. Costantinovka direction, pressure in the city center. From the Costantinovka sector, the picture is familiar. No dramatic shifts, the map isn't changing, but movement is there, slow, methodical, as is typical of combat in dense urban construction. Fighting is ongoing in the central part of the settlement. The AFU are actively using FPV crews, trying to slow the advance of Russian assault groups through the city blocks. According to several sources, the Russian army's actual zone of control inside Costantinovka is considerably wider than what is currently reflected on maps. Waiting for video materials before making changes. The trend, in any case, is unambiguous. Russian units continue to grind deeper into the city. Zaparijia direction. Stepnohirsk, Malotokmachka, Vosvizhivka. On the Zaparijia section of the front, the situation is mixed, and it's important to work through it without unnecessary emotion. Starting with Stepnohirsk. A number of pro-Ukrainian sources rushed to declare the settlement fully under AFU control, throwing in Primorsky alongside it for good measure. The real picture is different. The front line runs roughly through the middle of Stepnohirsk. The southern part is under Russian control, the northern part under Ukrainian control, with a buffer zone between them. Russian forces are also holding the dominant heights in this area, the very ones that were the subject of long and difficult fighting during previous offensive attempts. It was precisely control over these heights that ultimately allowed the gradual seizure of part of Stepnohirsk. Declaring the settlement a complete Russian loss is premature. Moreover, Russian positions here are being reinforced by reserves moving through Plavny and along a supply route on the eastern flank. The AFU are also bringing up forces, but are taking serious losses from Russian FPV crews, which are operating very actively on this section. Fighting continues. Malotokmachka. Video materials have arrived from here that clearly illustrate what advances look like under the conditions of modern warfare. In the area south of Malotokmachka, Russian drone operators discovered a fortified AFU shelter, a so-called den, dug into a tree line. 5 Ukrainian servicemen came under fire. An FPV drone flushed them from their position, with artillery and additional drones engaging the retreating soldiers. 2 of the fighters attempted to shelter inside a building, which was struck by the next drone hit. The result, Russian forces expanded their zone of control south of Malotokmachka by more than 2 kilometers. That may sound modest, but looking at the real scale of the terrain makes it clear. This is serious work in a drone-saturated combat environment where every 200 meters of advance comes at a real cost. Vosvizhivka and the Huliapol direction. Russian units are expanding the zone of control in the vicinity of Vosvizhivka. According to several sources, the greater part of the settlement has already come under Russian army control. At the same time, the front line is being straightened along the Dobrovilske, Varvarivka, Vosvizhivka axis. As of the time of this report, no changes have been recorded on maps for this sector, waiting for confirming materials. As soon as they come in, we'll break it down in detail. That's all for today, friends. The frontline picture is one of steady work. The northern group holds the initiative, and continues pressing on multiple directions simultaneously. In the south, Zaparijia is very much alive, fighting and movement across the board. Costantinovka, Kupansk, Sloviansk, pressure everywhere, activity everywhere. If this episode was useful, drop a like right now. It genuinely helps the channel fight the algorithms. Subscribe if you haven't already and turn on the bell. Otherwise, the next episode simply won't reach you in your feed. See you next time.